Hey everyone, welcome back to this episode of Whitley Penn Talks. We have the third episode in the major Fundcast series today, which kind of addresses what's going on in the public sector industry, what is expected in the future, and what is there to know. So we have Lupe Garcia and Celina Cereceres back to host with special guest David Webb. David actually serves as a director at Stifel Nicolaus and focuses on the bond market at large. He has experience working for school districts across Texas, focusing on their finances and sitting in that CFO role. So we're really excited to have him here today to talk bonds, to sort of discuss what we expect in the future and look back on the past a little bit. So we hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'm going to hand it over to Lupe and Celina to get started, and we hope you tune in for more.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third episode of Major Fundcast with our special guest, David Webb. My name is Lupe Garcia.
And I'm Celina Cereceres.
And we have David Webb, who's a director in Stifel's Texas Public Finance Practice.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, David, I want to let you know, you don't know this because I don't think I've ever shared this with you, but I think I first came across your name. It was one of the books that you authored. It was on the bookshelf at the firm. I think Charles Chuck Yapel, told me to read it, and he had a forward in it. I think
funding.
It was on state funding, state aid. This is probably back in 2007. I'm not sure if the front of the cover had a Texas flag.
I remember. Yeah.
I think Chuck was proud of the forward he wrote for the book.
He did. Yes.
Yeah, but I learned a tremendous deal reading through that book. It was a great read.
That whole book was a complete accident. I had written something up that was about 20 pages long for my school board when I was in LaPorte, and I knew it was too long for them to digest fully in one reading, but I made it as short as I could. When I moved over to Deer Park, I thought I would add some more to it and try to keep it readable. I wrote enough that 20 pages turned into 40 and 40 turned into 80, and I had some experts look at it and make some corrections, but one of them told me, you're already more than halfway to writing a book. Why don't you just flesh this out some more and finish it off and publish it? And not knowing any better, I did. So I self-published it, and I remember getting about 5,000 copies in boxes stacked up in my garage one summer, and my wife looked at it and said, "You're never going to get rid of all of those." And in about 2.5 months, they were all gone.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, it was a great book.
Thank you.
So I never worked, with you on any engagements, but when I got to actually meet you, I was like, "Hey, meeting the author of the book I read." Very good. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Your current role as director, and then how you got there. You mentioned LaPorte and Deer Park.
I'm currently a director with Stifel Nicolaus and Company. We do a lot of different things in the bond market, mostly municipal financial advisors and underwriting. We've got and also another group in Stifel that does financial advisory work for individuals. And so we've got sales and trading capabilities and people just all over. Stifel acquired my little firm that I was with for 6 years before George K. Baum last September. And it's been a great transition for us. Those of us that were here in Texas with GKB, it's just been a great transition. We're happy with our new home, and they've given us a lot more help than we had before, and so we're all very pleased with that acquisition now.
How do you feel your background as CFO in the school district environment helped you in your current role?
I think having worked in school business for 26 years helps from the standpoint of I don't have to meet strangers when I'm calling on school districts to obtain some business, whether it's municipal advisory business or underwriting business, because a lot of people in school business already know me and I already know them. I was in that business for 26 years, and I made the transition into the bond business because in 26 years I passed 4 bond elections for over $300 million. I had 40 sales that were either tax anticipation notes or contractual obligations or voter authorized bonds. So I thought I knew a lot about this market. Found out the hard way. I knew what I knew, but what I didn't know was a lot more than what I thought it was going to be. It's a complex business. It's part science, part art. The science, the mathematical part is easy to wrap your head around. The artistic part of it, sometimes it's a little nebulous, a little harder to get a feel for. But I've been doing this for 7 years now. And I think knowing a lot of the people in school business helps my business from the standpoint of when I talk to them, when they talk to me about what they're doing from a bond standpoint, they're not talking to a stranger. They're talking to someone they've probably known for 20 years.
So in some parts of the state, David, debt can be a 4-letter word. How do you explain to clients that issuing debt and taking some debt on now is actually beneficial to the government?
Debt is a 4-letter word to some people, especially to a lot of trustees that I've met out there in the last couple of years. And I get that. I get their concern. I'm not concerned about debt. What I am concerned about is if I take out a loan for a car that I know is going to last 6 or 7 years, but I take out a 10-year note, I don't want to be paying for it 4 years after the car is gone. The same principle applies to governmental debt. I don't want people paying 20 years on school buses that are only going to last 12 or 13. So I think it's not a question of debt. It's a question of matching up the debt with the useful lives of whatever it is you're buying or constructing with the debt. If those two match up, then I think it's a useful tool. Just like mortgaging a house or financing a car is for you and me individually, same principles apply to schools and cities and counties for the infrastructure that they purchase or construct.
And as far as making the transition from school business to this, what led you to GKB, which then became Stifel? But why did you pick that? If you wanted to leave school district business, what attracted you the most to this line of work?
Well, again, I thought I knew a lot about this business, and I did, but I didn't realize that the world of what I didn't know, how big that was going to be, and that's a challenge every day, because I learned something new every single week in this business. It seemed like a natural transition for me, because basically what I'm doing now is, aside from the roll up your sleeves, pencil pushing, calculator cranking work, is sales. I'm trying to convince clients to use us as opposed to one of our many competitors out there, when they may not differentiate that much between us. So I'm doing sales, and I just thought knowing so many people in Tasbo would be an advantage, and it has been, I think. So sometimes it may be a disadvantage, but at least I don't have to create new relationships with a lot of our clients out there, because a lot of my clients are people I've known for a lot longer than I've been in the bond business.
And at least you could also assist your clients with identifying pitfalls or things that you've seen in the past, because you've sat on that side of the table in the past. So I think that's usually beneficial for people like yourselves to assist your clients in that respect.
And I do have a couple of clients who are new to school business, and they know that, having sat in their chair for 20 years, that when it's time to sell bonds or some other kind of debt, they can call me. But when they have other issues related to their school business job, maybe non-debt related issues, that they can call me also.
Exactly.
So you've mentioned working with school districts. What other types of governments do you get to work with?
I've worked with here in town locally, City of Houston, on a couple of bond sales. Most recently, a fairly large one that they had. We've underwritten Harris County Metro once before. And I know the firm, the Texas group, does that. I mean, we have little bitty school districts as clients. We're financial advisor to the state of Texas, who is going to have here in a couple of weeks the single largest debt transaction in the country. At least I presume it will be the largest in the country. It'll be $7.2 billion in their 1 year tax and revenue anticipation note.
Wow.
Most of that money will go, or the plurality of which will go to fund school district payments in August, September, and October.
Wow. That's great to know.
So we've got big clients, we've got little bitty clients, and everything in between. Cities, counties, lots of school districts.
I didn't realize the state issued that short-term debt to make those payments.
It's
is
not something they do every year.
Okay.
But I would say in the last 7 years, more often than not, somewhere between 5 and 9 billion is where they've been the last 7 years, with a couple of those years in there where they didn't have to.
Is the size of the issuance as big as it is this time, or does COVID-19 play a part in that?
I don't know if COVID-19 is going to factor into that number for next year. I don't believe it's had any major influence on the number this year.
Okay.
So we're a little over halfway through 2020. What have you seen so far in terms of trends regarding bond sales with local governments? Anything that stands out to you?
We have had a little blip on the radar screen this year. When the market began to drop, when the stock market began to drop, the bond market reacted in a volatile manner. And back in March, I think everyone just put on the brakes for a couple of weeks and said, let's wait this out. I don't think it's going to last very long. Let's see what happens. Maybe we'll get some stability back. So we had a very low volume statewide in March and again in April of this year. In May, it picked back up. June was a very big month. So I think what was planned for March and April just got deferred to May and June. July numbers were pretty significant. And so it seems like we had a delay there, but very quickly caught back up.
So in terms of volume, it's on par or meeting expectations or what you would have otherwise seen in a normal year?
2016 was the biggest year we've had in the bond market in Texas. In 2016, we had over 1,900 different bond sales for almost $55 billion. And that was both volume and dollar-wise, that was the biggest year we've ever had. The numbers for this year are starting to add up to where they may be close to that and could possibly exceed it. I think 2021 will be a very big year in the bond market, mostly because we're going to have whatever activity we would normally have. Plus, you had a lot of elections in May that got canceled. There were 45, 50 school districts with bond elections in May, and I think only 2 of them actually conducted their elections as scheduled. Everyone else either canceled or deferred until November. So you add November elections that were going to happen in November anyway, with a lot of the deferrals from May, and I think here in a couple of weeks, when the dust starts to settle and the call for election deadline has passed, and we see who all called an election at the last minute, I think what we will see is a very high volume of elections that will be on the ballot in November. Historically, 80-85% of that money is going to pass. Even in a presidential election year, when people might not be all that in that good of a mood or that amenable to bonds, still 80% of it's going to pass, which means a lot of that's going to flood out into the market in as early as late December, a lot of it in January, February. So I would just guess off the top of my head that January and February are going to be really busy months for folks like me.
David, let's talk a little bit about investment trends. What type of diversity or lack of diversity are you seeing out in the market?
I think if you looked at about 100 different issuers, you would see maybe 50 different ideas of diversity in their portfolios. Diversity, when you have $10 million portfolio, probably looks a lot simpler than if you have $100 million. And I know from having taught the public funds investment classes for a number of years, I would ask students to bring their quarterly investment report to class, and we would pass those around and look at them to determine if their report complied with all the many aspects of the law that it required, including diversity. And there would be some that maybe are even overly diverse, and some that had plenty of diversity. From time to time, we would see some that didn't seem to have much at all. And the problem with that is the law says, Public Funds Investment Act states that you must have diversity in your portfolio. And that's all it says. It doesn't elaborate on that. The comptroller used to issue some guidelines that attempted to elaborate on that, but really didn't go into any kind of detail that would be practically helpful to anybody. So since 1987, when the law was first enacted, we've always had a requirement to have diversity, and we've never had any real guidance on what constitutes adequate diversity or not. But I do see some portfolios from time to time that if I had to plead their case in court, I just don't think I can make a good case for them having adequate diversity. It's not getting diversity in your portfolio and investing in a manner that would reflect that kind of diversity is not something that needs to be a full-time job. It's something that can be done pretty quickly and easily, but it requires some diligence. And as holdings in your portfolio mature, you have to replace them with as you lose some of that diversity through maturities, you have to replace it with something that keeps your diversity where it is. And I'm just not sure everyone is as diligent as they should be about that. But I don't know that it's ever been an issue for anybody.
For governments that may not have the time or the expertise on staff to properly diversify their portfolio, what might they be able to do to address that?
Training is probably the number one thing they can do, because managing your portfolio, however large it is not something that has to take a lot of time. And I know, especially in smaller districts that have smaller portfolios, those business managers wear a lot more hats, and so they just don't have the time. One thing I have seen in the last couple of years, and it's not like I just saw a switch flip where all of a sudden we see all these requests for proposals in the market, but just gradually over the last couple of years, I've seen an increase in the requests for proposals that come from schools, cities, counties, other municipal entities that have a portfolio for investment managers and investment consultants. And those are two different jobs. And what I found very interesting about them is I will see one that says we want an investment consultant. And I read through it, and what they really want is an investment manager. They want someone to come in and take over their portfolio and do the day-to-day management of the investment function for them. And I think of that as being an investment manager. If you've got enough money to hire a manager to take over your portfolio, you probably should invest in a professional consultant to advise you on how that manager is doing. a lot of times I'll see that RFP and it'll say consultant, and then you read it and it's really a manager, or it's both a consultant and a manager. And I've seen a lot more of those in the last 2 or 3 years than I used to ever see before.
Speaking of, requests for proposal, what have you seen in the financial advisor, municipal advisor realm?
We always see a fairly steady flow of requests for proposals for underwriting. There's a number of ways these issuing entities can hire underwriters or sell their bonds. One way is to put out an RFP, the request for proposal, and have all of us underwriters respond to it, and then they pick and choose based on their predetermined criteria who they're going to use to sell their bonds. So we see a steady stream of those out there over time. In the last year or so, I've seen a slight uptick in the request for proposals for financial advisors, or municipal advisors as we call ourselves now. And I don't think that's necessarily indicative of anything going on out there that's odd or unusual. I think we just go through phases where we see more of them, and then we'll go through another phase where we don't see them at all. The financial advisor, much like auditor or general counsel, is a very stable relationship, and those are three that I just don't see changing very often in municipal business in Texas. When they do put out those RFPs, sometimes it may be they're looking to change, sometimes it may be they've got a policy somewhere that says every 5 years or every 10 years you put out this request just to see what else is out there in the market, and they may not be thinking about changing at all, but they've got a policy that requires them to do it anyway.
David, here recently, the Texas Education Agency allowed school districts to submit a waiver in order to submit their annual financial reports later than the required 150 days. What advice or recommendation would you have for those districts that take that waiver going into 2021?
I've heard some chatter about this among some school district people, and the TEA gave them an extra 60 days, and them is school districts with a June 30th year end. So far, I haven't heard anything about the ones with the August 31st year end. So it's just the ones with the June 30th year end. They've got an extra 60 days. What they were dealing with before was 150 days to get their audit report approved by the board and submitted to TEA. They had 180 days to comply with bond covenants and other requirements as far as continuing disclosure. So they had a 30-day window in there. Now TEA has given those school districts an extra 60 days, which puts them 30 days the other side of that 180-day requirement. That's fine for the TEA requirement to be met for the school districts, but that 180-day requirement is still out there for their continuing disclosure. If someone were to ask me, what do I do? I would tell them you need to talk to your disclosure counsel or your bond counsel sooner rather than later, and make sure that you meet whatever deadlines you're required to meet in whatever way your counsel would advise you to do that. And there may be more than one answer to that question depending on which general counsel you ask. That's one of those things. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You've got an extra 60 days to get your audit report done, but you still have to meet those continuing disclosure requirements in some form or fashion.
And it's also dependent on the school district that you're dealing with. Some don't want to submit a draft for continuing disclosure purposes and then resubmit a final report. They don't like the look of that, and some just want to continue to just meet the deadline, not to worry about having any issues with continuing disclosure requirements. So that's our advice to our clients. That's fine. We want to see the waiver. We want to know that you'll be fine for TEA reporting purposes, but we also advise the same thing. Make sure you check with your counsel, your bond counsel, to make sure you've met all the requirements.
So Celina, when clients have asked you, do you need the additional 60 days to get the audit completed? What do you tell clients?
We'll work around the clock to make sure that we meet the 150-day reporting requirement, just because we know it's just a deferral and we're going to have to either meet in December or January, but you also have the August 31st year ends that we're having to issue on time. And so for us, we would rather be done by November, and I think everyone wants to enjoy their Thanksgiving. Those June 30th year ends want to be done before Thanksgiving. But if they do choose to extend that deadline, make sure that they've spoken to the proper individuals to make sure they're in compliance, because that's the last thing that we need. Is we're fine with TEA, but not with the regulatory agencies for our bonds.
So while it sounds attractive, maybe just push through and try to issue on time,
right?
Instead of taking that 60-day waiver unless you absolutely need to.
Yeah, that's correct.
David, what questions are you getting from your clients? If you could name one or two that come up a lot.
The one that comes up a lot today is refunding, bond refunding. You issue bonds at a certain coupon, and 7 years later, 10 years later, those bonds are callable, and it's the market that dictates whether or not you can refund those bonds at a savings. We're in a historic low interest rate environment. We haven't seen rates this low since the 50s, and so everyone is calling, can we refund? If we can, now's the time. And in some cases, it's pretty obvious that yes, now is the time to pounce and to refund some bonds at considerable savings. In some cases, not so much. If you sold some bonds previously with very low coupons, there may not be enough savings to justify doing it. In some cases, there were some bonds that were sold, I think, around 2010 or 11 that did not have, school district bonds that did not have the PSF guarantee. There was a short period of time when the PSF was closed, so you don't have that PSF guarantee, you can't get it for the refunding bonds. That changes the interest rate that you would get on the refunding bonds, and sometimes that's still doable and sometimes it's not. So it's not just carte blanche on refunding 7 to 10-year-old debt. Right now, it's still a matter of taking a hard look at it and doing some analytics and making certain that the savings are significant enough to warrant going to the trouble of refunding the bonds. And what level of savings is worthwhile versus what is not depends sometimes on the issuer themselves, the business manager, the superintendent, the board of trustees, or with the city, it could be the city manager and the city council. 5% savings might look like a fortune to one issuer, where some others want to hold out for significantly higher savings. So it's very individual specific, and not always as clear cut as you would think. But that's the big question right now is rates are low, let's go refund.
I'm glad you bring up refunding bonds, David, because that's a question as auditors that we receive a lot about is, the accounting for current refundings versus advanced refundings. And really here lately, we'd only been seeing current refundings, meaning the refunded bonds were redeemed within 90 days of the issuance of the refunding bond. The refunded bonds were redeemed within 90 days of the refunding bonds.
Yes.
But here recently, I came across a case of an advance refunding, which I hadn't seen in a while. So there are differences in accounting and financial reporting for both. So I'll get off the refunding bond soapbox there.
There are some taxable advanced refundings that are going out in the market right now. Not as many as current tax exempt, but a noteworthy amount is going out in the market right now. And again, it just depends on the specific situation with the issuer and what their tolerance for savings is. But yeah, I feel for you, because I know the hardest part of those refundings is the accounting for them. I'm glad y'all are doing that and not us. We get to do the fun part. You get to figure out how to journal entry it.
That's right.
Yeah, explaining to a board of trustees how the refunding had a deferred loss is always fun.
But when there was an economic savings, right, present value savings versus our accounting loss is very difficult, but too much for a Monday afternoon.
Yes. So looking forward to 2021, David, any advice or predictions? I know you mentioned a little bit about, the outcome of the November elections and December and January being very busy. Anything else you want to add or up to 2021, or anything you're telling your clients to be ready for in the next year?
What I'm hearing from a lot of people is they're obviously, from an instructional standpoint, schools are developing Plan A and Plan B. They're going to try to go back in the classroom. That may or may not work, and they may have to pull back very quickly and go back to online learning. So schools have got those two forks in the road to contend with. Cities, counties, other facilities that are open to the public, they're having to be very flexible and plan for contingencies. When do we start letting the public back into our public city council meetings? When do we start holding city council meetings in person again? Some are, some aren't yet. I've got several clients who are still online, and some that have been meeting in person for a couple of months now. At some point, you have a hot spot, an outbreak, and they may have to pull back. So I think the lesson they are learning, and what we're emphasizing with them, is just you've got to be flexible. You got to be able to move quickly and make decisions quickly, because it's a very unique world that we're in right now, and that flexibility and speed is going to be required. So in order to execute with speed, you have to already have that plan in mind.
I think, we're fortunate to be in Texas, that even though with the shutdown, that sales tax was down, but not down as much as was anticipated. And from what I can tell, people and businesses are still moving to Texas, so there's still going to be a need for schools and public services and roads and water facilities. So that'll drive, the need for debt, for public debt going forward.
We still have construction going on all along the Gulf Coast in the oil and gas market and the peripheral market that services the refineries. We've got Tesla moving out to the southeast side of Austin and Del Valley. We've got solar and wind farms still going up as fast as you can count them, all over the Panhandle and all the way down to Midland and probably point south. So business is still booming in a lot of places in Texas, and that's good. That's good for business.
David, as far as working remotely, what have you seen that your team has had to do differently here in the last few months, and until this pandemic is under control? What advice would you have for those working remotely as they're trying to serve their public sector clients and working with their teammates within their own companies?
I've worked from home for the last 7 years, and I know when I came out of the school district business, basically in a big bullpen of about 20 people, to working from home by myself, I had a hard time dealing with the silence. It was deafening. The TV called me, the refrigerator called me, the dogs called me to go for a walk. So there's a lot of distractions that you don't have in a typical office environment, and it's a learning curve. You have to teach yourself to deal with it, and to have some discipline. It's okay to go watch the news at noon for 30 minutes, but you've got to get 3 hours of work done first. So that's the bargain you have to make with yourself. Now, I know a lot of people who have started working remotely just since COVID-19 broke out. They've been doing that for about 6 months, and it took me about 6 months to get used to the silence and the very different environment. And some of them may be getting used to it. They may already be used to it. Some of them may still be struggling with it because it's a big change. And you just the one thing you have to do is have discipline to say, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to stay in my chair until I get a couple of important tasks done, and then I can get up and I'm going to go walk around and go get a Coke and pat the dog on the head. But then I've got to get back to work pretty quickly after that. If you take a break at work for 15 minutes to go get coffee, then you can take a break for 15 minutes at home. But 15 minutes can't turn into an hour. And since there's no one there watching you, you have to have the discipline to make yourself do that. You don't have anybody there to guilt you into going back to work. You have to do it yourself. I presume some people are doing really well with that. Some of them are probably struggling a little bit, but they'll find their way.
Lupe and I have been speaking to our team members too, saying when you get up and you're going to work from home, pretend you're going into the office. Wear your professional clothes or business casual clothes. Look presentable, because that does change your whole attitude and outlook for the day. If you're going to work in pajamas all day, you're probably going to be not in such a professional mood or be inclined to get on Zoom calls. You're probably going to want to stay out in the background. But I think it's all about encouraging yourself and staying pumped throughout the day, because I know the first 2 months was tough for me. The silence was terrible. I need people. And but yeah, I had to do all those things as if I was coming to the office just to feel normal. But
well, and for the first couple of months, you could sit around in your pajamas because we were all presuming this is going to be over and we're going back pretty quickly. That hasn't happened for everybody just yet. So yeah, I think you do. Get up, take your shower like you normally would. Put on clean clothes, not the ones you wore yesterday, not your pajamas. And you may not have to put on the suit and tie, but put on a shirt and at least look presentable for those video conferences that you're going to have. No one wants to see you with a week's worth of stubble on your chin or your hair, if you have any, sticking up like little alfalfa. They want to see you looking professional and presentable. So as this continues to go on, I think observing that kind of discipline will get easier, and it's just part of the learning process of working from home.
Right. And I think too, as far as communication, we've just stressed, sometimes it's just easier to pick up the phone, because by the time you craft an email to detail the issue you're having on a particular client or within the firm or with a client, it's just easier to pick up the phone instead of writing a novel to your. It's more time consuming is what we're finding, to have to do that to convey the message or to convey the solution to a problem you've been working on for a week, where in the past we could just pop into each other's offices and solve a problem, but now you have to write this novel. Have you seen that as well, that your communication skills really have to?
Yeah, people can talk faster than they can type, and the people you're directing your message to can hear you and process it faster than you can type. So it always is more time consuming to type it and send it in an email. Now, there may be times when you need a documentation trail of a discussion for whatever reason. But typically you can have a conversation and follow it up with a recap and say, here's what I understood we discussed earlier, and sometimes recap it in a much shorter format. That's probably never a bad idea, whether we're working from home or not. But yeah, especially when you feel isolated at home, it probably feels better for you to pick up the phone and talk to someone and hear their voice and have an exchange with them. It's not the same as face to face, but it's all we've got right now.
So this next section of our podcast, David, we want the listeners to get to know you a little better. So we're going to ask get some fast, fun facts with David Webb. So the first question I'm going to ask you, tell us all about your very first car.
My very first car was a Chevy Nova, and it was a very, very plain 3-speed on the column, rack and pinion steering. Nothing was automatic. Very difficult car to drive, and it had a little bit of character itself. It was cranky. There were times when it would just not want to start. And I do remember one night in the University of Houston Central Campus parking lot in the middle of a torrential downpour. It would not start. And I just beat that car with my umbrella until there was nothing left of my umbrella, and I was drenched. And then the car started. Good, solid little car. It just no frills, certainly nothing fancy at all.
What about your very first job?
Very first job ever, or after college?
No, just ever. Your very first job.
My very first job, I think I was a freshman in high school, and I worked at Mr. Fresh Dairy Store. Now, I doubt that y'all remember those. Do you remember? No? Those were long gone by the time y'all were probably in high school. It's a little bitty, it's almost a little photo booth of a store that you could drive through and get milk, a big 2.5 gallon jug of milk, or any other kind of dairy products, cheese, cottage cheese. I think we did have some soft drinks in the cooler that we could sell also. And anytime you got more than $20 in the cash register, you put it in an envelope and you dropped it in a little floor safe. And you really couldn't stretch your legs in there because there wasn't enough room to move around. So you had a little cash register and a chair that you would sit in, and that's where you sat for about 4 or 5 hours because there wasn't anywhere else to go unless you're going to get out and walk around in the drive-through. And it was a interesting place because by the time I graduated from high school, I think that place had closed down. They used to have them all over the southeast part of Houston, and I think they were all gone by the time I graduated from high school. Supermarket ran them out of business, but it was a cool little place to work because there wasn't enough room for another employee. So when you were at work, you were there by yourself. So you didn't have anybody breathing down your neck or telling you what to do. It was cool.
So how would you go on break?
Oh, there wasn't any break.
What are you watching on TV? Anything interesting you've watched on TV recently or streamed?
I was so starved for sports when everything shut down for a while. I was excited when the golfers picked up. And I think golf is fun to play, but it's boring to watch. But I started watching them because for a few weeks there, that's all we had. We've got basketball and baseball started back up now, so I've got a little diversity in my sports viewing. But I did about 2 months ago start watching the Perry Mason, the mini series, I guess it is, on HBO. And a lot of people remember the old Perry Mason show from the 60s, the black and white with the dignified attorney and the very straight-laced, leave it to Beaverland type setting of all the cases that they handled. And everything was just so nice and normal and perfect in the Perry Mason world. And this HBO show went back to the very beginning when Mr. Mason had gotten out of the war and out of the military and been a private eye working for an attorney, and tells the story of how he becomes an attorney in his first big case. And being HBO, it's sometimes a little PG-13, and there's a couple of times when it's R-rated. But it was very realistic. I thought it was very well written and well acted, and I was sad to see the last episode last night because it leaves you wanting more. It was just very high quality television, and in this day and age of so many reality shows that I think are just trash. I found that very refreshing. So I enjoyed that thoroughly. And if they wanted to pick up in a year or two and tell the story that they left in the middle, from his first case to where the 60s storylines picked up, I'd be glued to my TV for that first episode. It was just very good TV and very thought-provoking and probably very realistic too. So I enjoyed that.
I hadn't heard of that one, but I'm going to have to add it to my list to must watch. So you brought up golf and basketball and baseball. So we'll end this here with, your favorite team. What are you known for as being a fan of? What team?
I'm a big Texas Longhorn fan. I graduated from there. I grew up first cutting my teeth on football, watching Texas win 30 in a row and a couple of national championships in the late 60s and early 70s. Actually met Earl Campbell on campus one time, met him in El Paso at a hotel one time. He was checking in as I was checking out. That was exciting. Anytime you meet someone that well known and famous, especially in the UT world.
Did you get a selfie?
No, that was before we had phones with cameras on them. But it was exciting, and I'll grow old and senile and forget who I am, but I won't forget meeting Earl Campbell a couple of times in El Paso of all places. Yeah, yes. To run into Earl Campbell. But I'm kind of a weird Longhorn fan because I've always liked the Aggies. My daughter is a graduate of Texas A&M. What year? 13 or 14, graduate of A&M, and I was happy to see her go there. I would love for her to have been a Longhorn, but Austin's not the same place in 2010, 2014 that it was when I was in school there. I felt much safer with her going to A&M. So, and I've always liked the Aggies. I think they've got a lot of cool traditions that we should adopt. And I've never understood the animosity. I understand the rivalry. I just have never understood the rivalry between those, or the animosity between those two, because I've never felt that way myself. So I think that makes me a sort of a weird Longhorn fan. Certainly in the minority with my other Longhorn followers.
Well, David, we want to thank you for joining us on episode number 3. We've learned a tremendous amount from your knowledge and experience, and I know our listeners have too.
Well, thank you again for making time for us, and I'm sure many people will be reaching out for advice or just to hone in from or learn more from all of your knowledge. So
thank you. It was a pleasure being here.